I need to read less just for the sake of not having to deal with these ridiculous thumbnails. Oh, precarious. My wrists. Ow. Hi, my name is Yana. I'm a modern ajumma. I read so many books this month, so we need to get started. Let's just start off with 4 Babysitters Club books that I read, which were Jessi and the Bad Babysitter, Special Edition Logan Story, Welcome Back Stacey, and Claudia and the Sad Goodbye. I read all 4 of these while I was sick in bed with the summer flu, and it's all I really wanted to do, all I could really feel capable of doing, and you know, the heart wants what it wants. Read these as Libby ebooks. It was comforting. I'm pretty sure I read all 4 within the day. Just like the last time that I binged a few Babysitters Club books, I have more or less the same takeaway this time, how much I marveled at the way kids' books during the, when was this written, like from the late 80s to early 90s, talked about things like how you might have a friend who isn't for everybody. Like, not every kid is gonna get along with everybody, and how important it is to say that that's okay, and not like villainizing the kid who doesn't get along with everybody, or raising issues like toxic masculinity and what's okay for boys and what's okay for girls, and why does that ultimately really matter. How much Anna Martin does not hold back on the heaviness of divorce and its ripple effects. How much she doesn't hold back on grief, losing a loved one in your family, dealing with death, that it's okay and very normal to feel a myriad of feelings while grieving. So much emotional maturity in these children's books that, you know, I'm not even sure I really find in a lot of contemporary adult books today. They still hit. I read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling, which was published firstly in 1997. For the first real time, as I was reading this with my son, we read this aloud, we alternated pages, reading from my husband's OG first editions that he bought brand new as a kid as they were being published. However, I just wanted to show this Mina Lima edition of Harry Potter, which is incredibly beautiful. It is art on every page. There's wonderful things like pop-ups that are just so stunning and full of exquisite details as such. And again, this is another children's book that still hits. I just found this to be excruciatingly charming. The world building is no joke. It has been a while since I have felt the tingle of excitement that you get from the feeling when you make new friends in a new place. This really delivers that. But overall, what I love the most is that despite the magical setting, the charm of Harry Potter is how true to life everything really is. Draco isn't a caricature of a villain. He's still just a kid who's been taught to be entitled and odious, but you know, like nothing out of the ordinary. I do have a soft spot for Draco Malfoy. Just so much potential that unfortunately is in the wrong hands of his parents. And if anything, Harry comes across as a very reactionary bore, but you know, that's nothing unusual either. Of course, I love Hermione. She's my favorite, the one who reads everything, searches for answers in books, and is the top of her class because of her strong work ethic. So what I mean by I first really read this year, July 2025, is that I have struggled to read the Harry Potter series because I would read this first book and then just try to pick up the second. Everyone acknowledges that the second book is the dullest one of the series, and I've seen all the movies, but again, just very casually, very passively. I realized reading it this time around that all the other times that I've read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, it had been read very passively. I know that J.K. Rowling is canceled right now, but I guess that's just not enough to stop me from being in the moment, you know, 20 years later, and really appreciating this story. I don't know, have you guys heard of this Harry Potter? It's really good. I do this all the time, especially with my poor husband who, you know, he got really into Lana Del Rey, for example, like in the late 2000s or like 2010, you know, like way before she blew up. And at the time I was just like, she can't even sing. What is this melancholy drivel? What are these lyrics? And then, you know, like when was it, 2020? 2021? With her Norman fucking Rockwell album. I'm like, oh my god, who is this poet? Lana Del Rey. Her voice is ethereal. These lyrics are incredible. She gets it. I do this regularly. So at the moment, I'm just sharing with you that I'm doing this for Harry Potter. I laugh at myself too. As you can tell from the ridiculous thumbnail for this video, I read several big books. It's big book summer for me, apparently. I'm just gonna start off with my very favorite one, The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard. This was published in 1990. I do own this newly printed, recently published edition that was illustrated by the British artist Luke Edward Hall. And it has a really wonderful introduction by Joanna Lumley, who is a quintessential 20th century British actress. I've already said this so many times. I love this book. I was blowing through this month and I had to tell myself to slow down. I should really savor it. I've mentioned a couple of times that the feelings that I got while reading this book were the same exact ones that I felt while reading the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante, in which I immediately knew that this is a very special story. The Cazalet Chronicles is an epic tale about this one middle-class British family. The Light Years is the first book. It starts in between the world wars, like as the second one is fomenting and everyone's kind of nervous about it. I found this to be utterly cozy. I was enthralled by every little banal detail for this family and everyone in it. There's even a chart of all of the family members, even pets, and who they are and how they're related to the family. But right away, I was like, no, I got it. I love everybody in it. I want to know everything about everybody. I love the straightforward attitude of Elizabeth Jane Howard's in the way that she writes about money, about sex, about politics, about everyday practicalities. Just immediately endeared. I was absolutely tucked in cozily reading this book, kicking my feet, giggling like a schoolgirl, doing my damnedest not to spoil myself. There is a BBC miniseries adaptation for this that I very naughtily watched like the first 30 minutes of the first episode before I was like, no, I really don't want to know before like reading and finishing these books before watching the series, which I'm already like slightly underwhelmed by. Like just nothing is comparing to this book for me these days. And you know, if I could be like an influencer and just, you know, if my impetus is to sell anything to anybody, which I have huge qualms over. That's why I have a really love-hate relationship with influencers and the meaning of the word. But if I could be one at all, I would love to influence everybody to try reading The Light Years, try reading this series. If this could blow up as big as the Neapolitan novels, like this is the new Neapolitan novels of 2025, 2026, that would be wonderful. This first book in particular of the series is extremely summery. It's set during a couple summers in the 1930s. The reason why this is so cozy is because it does give off that feeling of being in a large family, going away for the summer to your family home while on break from boarding school, figuring out how to fill your days with your cousins and the myriad of people all on this one estate. If you're more in the perspective of the children, if you feel more kinship with the women and the wives, you immediately feel their struggles with personal finances and with worries of the children, worries over households, worries about where your life is headed and how it's gotten to this place. If you feel more drawn towards the men's storylines, which I'm not sure why anyone would, to be honest, but if that so happens is to be your case, there's plenty of world politics and like your personal business and the things that haunt you from your past that shaped who you've become today. And it's just a marvel to me that there are so many characters, there are so many names to remember in this story, but Elizabeth Jane Howard deftly juggles them all. It does not feel overwhelming in the least to keep up with who is who and what they're all doing, and that every time I dipped into this book, it just immediately felt like taking that long hot shower at the end of a long work day, indulging in, at least for me, my particular childhood fantasy of belonging to a large family and having that whole dynamic going on where everything is tight but comfortable and life is whirling by. The food descriptions made me really appreciate more the Downton Abbey cookbooks that I read recently. Like, it wasn't lying. They were all eating things like bread sauce and steamed puddings and runner beans. It's just one of those stories where it feels so true to life. Every character feels like somebody you know from your own life. I'm falling in love with this series. I'm head over heels for the light years. If you're in that mood, if any of what I've said sounds like a good time for you, get your paws on this. It's a beautiful physical object. Don't be intimidated by its size. It is about 550 pages, but I promise you that you will keep begging for more. And luckily there are tons more to follow in the rest of the series. I can't wait. I'm telling myself to pace myself, read one a month, and it'll be finished in a year, but at least I took half a year to really savor it. When I first read the Neapolitan novels, I did myself a disservice, this channel a disservice, by not really talking about it, because I told myself at the time, like a dummy, I'll hold back and just mention that I'm reading this, mention that I like it, without really getting into it at all, and I'll make a separate video just about the series. And I never did that because that's just not how my brain works, first of all, and ultimately just never happened. And also, when I was reading the Neapolitan novels, I knew that I was reading it way too quickly. I really just wanted to dive straight to the deep end, immerse myself in the plot, know what's going on, know how the story ends, and ask questions later. I don't think that's the right way to do most anything. Definitely not the correct way to enjoy a very well-told story. So I'm learning my lesson from the Neapolitan novels and applying it to the Cazalet Chronicles. I'm just gonna tell you right now that I love the first one. Oh, I also should mention a caveat that even though I'm telling you that The Light Years is super cozy, it's so charming, it's so comforting, the topics themselves, just like the Neapolitan novels, do involve things like sordid affairs and infant deaths. There's incest, there's a rape, there's a lot of pretty dark topics that I'm like, oh, I love it, I love it, I love it. And I genuinely, wholeheartedly do. But what can I say? This is my catnip. There is nothing that I would want changed about this book, about this story. And it's wonderful. It's incredible. It is what has been giving me life lately. The other big chunker that I've really enjoyed this month is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is the thrill that I was seeking post the Overstory. Like all these years, maybe I just really love political anarchy themes. I found this to be such a fun allegory of the capitalist colonialist world in the key of dark academia or like fantasy. There are so many great details in this book as well, like how silver is basically power, the philology and linguistics of everything. And even though this is like a fantasy genre, nothing again feels really out of the realm of reality, and that truly is what makes this story work. I've heard a lot of comparisons with Babel to The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and to me that feels so unjust. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed The Secret History. I thought it's also a very fun book. It's a very special singular novel, but Babel does one better by speaking to the political forces that rule the world and packages that in a really approachable, digestible way. Like the 500 plus pages truly fly by with this. And to my recollection, at least, The Secret History, I only really remember like a narrative of some petty children who were just wrapped up in their own quagmire. I loved the interludes for Rami, for Letty, for Victoire. It just had the perfect amount of backstory to show where each of those characters came from. I need the screen adaptation for this like yesterday. This was the absolute perfect book choice to read over the 4th of July weekend. It made me feel so empowered. Very fun. I love Babel. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen Amor Towles, The Lincoln Highway. This came out in 2021. Just everywhere. Bookstores, Costco, the library store. I always had it in the back of my mind to eventually read this. I've heard so much praise for this book. It's another big, thick, plotty, summary novel. This month seems to be the time for me to get on that, so I did. I found this to be a fast read, very amusing. Not gonna lie, slightly bored until about like the 40 percentile mark, where the best character comes in with the best dad line. In that man's heart, there's more treachery than preachery. I just found this a little too repetitive, a little too preachy, overly earnest. Emmett is so boring. Towles' manipulation over the reader with the character of Billy is super transparent, but still it does work. And this is just the kind of solid old school writing and storytelling that is done very well. The ending was also really great. Almond by won-pyung, translated by Sandy Jusun Lee. This was published in 2016 and happened to be my Read Good Challenge July book. It's also a book that has been on my shelves for years at this point that I kept telling myself to read, and I never did until this summer, until this month. And you know, not gonna lie, I'm unsure what my takeaway for this should be, other than like, yeah, different people are still good people. I think the YA tone kind of threw me off. The very stilted main character just left me cold overall, and this was a reminder why I don't get along with K-dramas for a reason. Just a little too self-serious, which I find to be the main reason why YA genre and I just don't generally mix. Like, I just find them a little too overdramatic. But I've always been really stunned by this cover. So well done in every way. I mean, quick book cover critique, I guess. Why not? The colors, first of all, spectacular color pairings. I love that this isn't a white, this is a gray juxtaposed by the fuchsia with this lilac, and this yellow isn't like too bright a yellow. It's a mustard yellow. Overall, the whole color scheme is very like grayed in hue. Of course, I love the almond shape in the brain area of the skull that houses the word "a novel." On the spine, almond is written on this almond shape. Just every detail is exquisite. I love that it doesn't scream YA, even though you can kind of see it once you've read the book and realize that it is like a coming of age story. Even though I didn't particularly love the novel itself, I still truly love the cover. What I've been doing lately is, if I don't really love the book, or if I feel like I'm ready to pass on the book, I've been donating to make more room for my shelves, but I'm definitely going to hold on to this physical book for a long time. I truly, genuinely enjoy this cover. If I were to like have a best book covers of all time award, this would definitely be on the best list. I read Immaculate Conception by Ling Huang. I think this is her second novel, which came out this year in 2025. I read it as a Libby audio, read by Carolyn King. Ling Huang, as far as I'm concerned, is a YA novelist. This book and her first book that I read, Natural Beauty, just speaks to the youths way more than an overripe ajumma like myself. I just couldn't take Natural Beauty too seriously because it made boogeymen out of the beauty and wellness industry, and I can't take Immaculate Conception seriously because it does the same thing and it makes the art world into a caricature. I just laughed out loud at the silverfish eating the Bible exhibition. Like the whole main character whining for shared credit, and her whole thought process I just found like painfully naive rather than like endearingly naive. Again, I found this to be too self-serious. I personally much prefer like Mary H.K. Choi for like earnest YA. And then Huang's recurring themes of the 1% being like inhuman, soulless devils, you know, should speak to me. I'm sure it speaks to so many, but it's really her delivery, I think. You know, since this book is about painting and the art world, let's bring a painter into this. I kept thinking of Audrey Kawasaki. I'll link her homepage below in the description box. Like, the works of Kawasaki and Ling Huang are both very slick and very pretty, but I find too self-serious and shallow. Like, they're both very easy to like. I just don't particularly like them myself. I read The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This book was published in 1998. It won the Pulitzer Prize, apparently. I don't think I knew that. I read Day earlier this year in April. I found that book to be quite dull, but erudite enough for me to go for like the book that gave him his claim to fame. And now I can just rest easy knowing that Michael Cunningham is not the droid for me. I really should have known that for his choice of Virginia Woolf to homage. I see the cleverness in this device, like all his nods to Mrs. Dalloway, which is a book that I thought was pretty good, actually. I see why this won the Pulitzer. I see why it gets so much gravitas. But you know, just like Ling Huang, I guess, this just isn't my bag. You know, like the whole Laura Brown being Richard's mother and that being like the twist. So sorry to spoil it, but come on, this came out in 98. It is so famous. I'm not sorry. But that's just precisely the point, to show how like the one moment in your life can cause all these huge ripples. But it's also so hammy. It's so corny. I eye rolled instead of chuckled at the Meryl Streep bit. I thought this was successful in his like trying to emulate the famous Wolfian stream of consciousness. And so I guess ultimately this is probably just the most highly praised fanfic ever. It's just one of those books, you know, how you don't think that it's bad. You probably think that it's a good book. However, it's just not the book for you. This writer is not for you. This perhaps genre is not for you. And every now and then, it's kind of important for you to read a book like that so that you still have that bellwether for your tastes. Every month I try to make a dent into the 2 Penguin Littles that I have, and this month I read The Duke and His Domain by Truman Capote. This is an incredible long-form article on Marlon Brando while he was in Japan on location to film the movie Sayonara, and he spills his guts to Truman Capote. Or at least Capote spins a great tale about a man who probably everybody in America at the time thought that they knew who Marlon Brando is, and really gave them like a new different side to this man. This is immersive journalism. It's like the best late night conversation that you have with someone over drinks, over food, where you talk about all of your worries, all of your thoughts, how he feels lost in life, his unmet ambitions, his diet struggles. There was something that he talked about, like how there are colors between roles. Like he was saying that the Guys and Dolls role that he did, it was like a yellow role. I'd never heard of that before. I thought that was super interesting. Yes, there is racism in this book, but overall, I thought that this writing was strong enough to overlook it. Yes, why bother going to bed when it's so hard to wake up? Another mammoth summer chunker. Every month I tried to read a piece of poetry. This month I decided to tackle my collected poems of Denise Loverto. This was my random purchase at a particularly well-stocked Barnes & Noble because I was really drawn by this stunning cover painting in a Shoreham garden. Shoreham? British people, please correct my pronunciation. By the artist Samuel Palmer, which I believe you can find at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. I'd never heard of Denise Loverto. She is a British-American 20th century poet, a super liberal lady. There's an intro written by Evan Boland who talks about the merits of reading a collected poetry tome like this so that you can see their entire oeuvre, see their growth and their metamorphosis. Loverto primarily worked with the publisher New Directions, so this is a New Directions book, and all of the poems are arranged in order by volume that they came out in. But I also really like that at the end they do have an index of titles, so if you wanted to find a particular poem, you could just look at that. I just read this throughout the month. I really see this as a guideline on how to live. Bringing it back to myself, it made me wonder, what would it have been like had I never stopped painting or just stuck with anything, so that I can see the level of progression. I saw the magnitude of constant work, not just in form, but like in the sharpness and the confidence, the mastery in continuous practice. Living in the 20th century, obviously there were so many political events that Levertov's mind responded to via poetry unwaveringly, which I found to be so inspiring. Incendiary. Like, I find 20th century social politics to be particularly nuts, and it inspired me to sharpen my own wits, raise my own ambitions. Next time I'll move like cautious sunlight, open the door by fractions, eavesdrop peacefully, is a fucking beautiful last sentence. Yeah, again, I had no idea who Denise Loverto was. I mean, I still kind of don't. Like, I don't really know her placement in the community within the world of poetry at large, much less American poetry. However, I so do appreciate her work that spanned a lifetime, seeing the dedication that one can put into something your whole life, no matter what it is, can only be impactful, however large or small, and you'll never know it unless you put your eyeballs on it and take a look at it. With poetry, I never really like go searching for anything. I just want to see what's there. I'm so glad that I found this month. I have a split lip and it's getting crusty. It's been hard to talk, which is one of the reasons why I'm a little more low energy in this video today. This month I read 2 books that were recommended to me by Ann Patchett in her Friday reads, whatever they're called, like where she goes on social media and she recommends books. So I read Everything is Tuberculosis, The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection, written by John Green. This was published this year in 2025. I read this as a Libby audio read by the author, whose passionate voice, I must say, for the subject of TB and all of the fun facts about it to be so infectious. Haha. You know, I had never known that the Adirondack chair was designed for TB patients to rest on, that the city of Pasadena and Southern California in general, one of the primary reasons for its existence, for it being made into a community, was for tuberculosis sanatoriums. I loved how he addressed inherent racism. The disease is where the cure is not, and the cure is where the disease is not. We have entered a strange era of human history. A preventable, curable infectious disease remains our deadliest. That's the world we are currently choosing. I like how he challenges the concept of like natural death, disease being an acceptable way of dying. So I don't really know who John Green is. I read The Anthropocene Reviewed when it came out several years ago because of its attractive cover and because I saw it at Costco. But I've never read any of his fiction. I'm a little wary of them being too YA for me. Let me know if you would disagree, and if so, what novel of his that I should try. But in these 2 nonfiction books of his that I've read, I just find him to be pretty earnest, very kind, and very knowledgeable. Am I wrong? Do let me know. I don't really know how people see John Green. I don't even really know if that's important at all. Just like Denise Loverto, doesn't really matter who they were so long as you give their works a try. So overall, I liked Everything is Tuberculosis. I did not really care for Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service by Michael Lewis. Also came out this year in 2025. Again, read as a Libby audiobook, read by the author and all of the multiple people who contributed essays to it. I think I read somewhere that this was either a podcast, or he has a podcast, or this was, published elsewhere in the New Yorker or something. But this book in particular, Ann Patchett has been imploring people to read in particular. I see why she does that. This book was written in response to Trump firing the 500 federal employees during his first transition. Its purpose is to dispel the common misconceptions that a lot of Americans have of federal employees, of being lazy and ineffective. A lot of conservative Republicans, I'm told, believe in small government and therefore don't like all of these seemingly random branches of government. And so this book attempts to tell all these stories of myriad avenues of all the different kinds of government employees there are, whose jobs it is to fix seemingly random but important problems that we all take for granted in getting fixed. My favorite chapter by far is the second one by Casey Sepp, and it shines a spotlight on the VA, the Veterans Affairs. I had no idea that the US takes the concept of no one left behind in both life and death, and that there are people whose jobs it is to still find and identify the remains of bodies of soldiers from the Vietnam War, even from World War II. So shout out to Ron Walters of the NCA, whose customer satisfaction ratings exceed even Costco's. That is high praise. The reason why I didn't particularly think this book was very good is because overall I just couldn't get away from the feeling that I was being lectured to and that I was being spoon-fed my vegetables. It's obviously very earnest and very well meant, interestingly cherry-picked, but ultimately, who is this book for? And what more is it than extra timber for the echo chamber fire? The people who would appreciate this book already would appreciate the people who this book talks about. And the people who wouldn't naturally be inclined to read books like this wouldn't read it. I don't know. I just feel like I didn't get that much out of it. If I were Ann Patchett, instead of Who is Government, I would rather recommend this book, Money, The True Story of a Made-Up Thing by Jacob Goldstein. This book came out in 2020. This was a very fun pop history of how systems of money came to be. I thought it was very oversimplified, but a good introductory level for people like me who think of money as something important for sure, but I don't really know anything about. Like the John Greens, the Denise Lovertovs, yeah, I guess I know who they are, but I don't know who they are. You know what I mean? And overall, I found this book to be best served as a restructuring of your mind to think about money differently, to the way that it really is. And the best thing that I got out of this book is the very funny line from the film You've Got Mail, one of my favorite movies, in which Greg Kinnear's character, was he a writer for The New Yorker? Or he was a very highbrow writer who had this line about writing something relevant for our times, like the 19th century Luddite movement. This book talks about that, and Greg Kinnear's character was right all along, because the 19th century English Luddites were skilled artisans who were made obsolete by the Industrial Revolution, and it was very much a eat the rich story. This is a quote by Matt Levine, who is a banker turned writer, but I really liked it. Finance moves money around in time. The essence of finance is time travel. Saving is about moving resources from the present into the future. Financing is about moving resources from the future back into the present. If you are like me and you also don't really know about money, I think you should read this book. Apparently Jacob Goldstein is again another podcaster or something. I don't know. I don't listen to any podcasts, TBH. But apparently he is a podcaster, and if you listen to his podcast and are very familiar with it, this book might be pretty redundant for you. However, if you don't know who this guy is, and if you don't know much about money, I think you'd really get a kick out of this. I read The Mirage Factory, Illusion, Imagination, and the Invention of Los Angeles by Gary Krist. This came out in 2018. This is another nonfic book that I read this month that I found to be interesting, but wasn't sure quite what to take away from it per se. This book is kind of like a collection of all these disparate movers and shakers of the early 1900s in Los Angeles that made what Los Angeles is like today. However, I just didn't understand why two of the people mentioned, one of whom is D.W. Griffith, who is best known as the director of Birth of a Nation. And the second person, her name is Amy Semple McPherson, aka Sister, who was this cult leader, for lack of a better word. He spends 60% of this book focused on those two people. A third person he chooses to focus on, but much less, is somebody who built the LA Dam, whose obsession to build an aqueduct to provide Los Angeles its water supply. I probably found the water parts in this book to be the most interesting and gave me the most insight about the town that I happened to grow up in. Yeah, I don't know. It was am I reading about the history of LA, or am I reading a biography on this racist director and this cult leader who, the most charitable way I can think of framing just what weird and terrible people that we used to pine over, who influenced us in the past. So I guess I went into this with expectations of oh, this is the history of LA, but it was very much wasn't that, or at least it is that, just definitely not in the way that I anticipated it to be told. The whole story of the LA and Owens Valley water wars I found to be the most illuminating, the most of what I kind of wanted out of a book like this. I've always driven past on road trips that whole area of the Owens Valley that he talks about, and I had no idea that there was ever anything like that it did shape LA to be what it is today. I just wish there was more of that, as opposed to focusing on the life of D.W. Griffith, or the mystery of what happened to Sister. While Gary Krist makes his own opinions clear, he doesn't really focus on the socioeconomic injustice, and neutrally tells the story how it unfolds. Yeah, it was just, I just can't get over why I needed to know so much about D.W. Griffith. I did read this because it was a recommendation by Audrey of Audrey Approved. She finds the best nonfictions to read, and she heartily recommended this to me because she knows that I'm from the LA area. While it was not a 5-star read for me, I still very much appreciate reading new things that I would have never otherwise have had on my radar. So thanks, Audrey. I read The Devil and Sherlock Holmes, Tales of Murder, Madness, and Obsession by David Grann, as a Libby audio read by Mark Deakins. This book came out in 2010. However, I read The Old Man and the Gun last month, and I think like half the stories in this book are the same as in The Old Man and the Gun, so this unfortunately was redundant for me. But I always love reading David Grann. I love how much he works in the realm of grim reality, like from mobs and the Aryan Brotherhood to more like individual focus, like on a scientist who sunk all of his money into the pursuit of researching the giant squid, which I honestly found probably to be the most boring story in this book, but for whatever reason, I've always been extremely fascinated by giant and colossal squid and just by megafauna in general, especially like the animals of the deep seas, just because we don't know much about them. They look like nothing else and just seem utterly unreal. Anyway, I liked that the purpose of this book seems to be Grann showing how and why people do what they do. So even though this was redundant, I still enjoyed it. I might even say that you should read this instead of The Old Man and the Gun if you want to be a David Grann completionist. Why not? The last of my summer chunkers is this huge nonfic tome, Strangers in the Land, Exclusion, Belonging, and the Epic Story of the Chinese in America by Michael Lowe, which came out this year in 2025. I happened to see this on the shelves of Barnes & Noble, and instead of buying it, I saved money by getting it as a library book instead. It just looked intriguing to me. Because I'm so fascinated by 20th century social politics, you can't not talk about Chinese social politics when talking about the 20th century. So I was really excited to get into this. However, I found this to be utter repetitive trauma porn. I get that there were atrocities, but Luo just keeps repeating atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. And what really does the disservice is, from the beginning, Luo makes the decision to paint Chinese American history in the 19th century in a vacuum and only talk about what was going on to the Chinese community, which ultimately creates this uneven portrait of like whites against Chinese, which I just find to be an incomplete picture. A real trees and not the forest, this one. I did appreciate Luo, God bless him, took care to preserve all the names and details when available of countless stories. But again, like the repetitive nature of it all counteracts that impact. And then the overall tone of, hey, isn't this atrocity terrible? Of the whole book was just the final nail in the coffin. This definitely could have used some good editing. And alas, very much unfortunately for this book, I happened to read Women Talking by Miriam Taves, which came out in 2018. Like at the same time, this also speaks on horrific violence done onto a community. However, Miriam Taves I found to be an infinitely more interesting and profound in her thoughts on IRL brutality. I found this book to be stunning, incredibly contemplative, and fair. I found this beautiful. I found this haunting. I was just left speechless. Even the twists are delicately done. The fact that I so much enjoyed this non-violent, measured response made me wonder if I'm a true pacifist, because in my regular IRL, I'm very much like Switzerland. I try to see multiple aspects to anything. I always very much seek out the gray and try my best to stay out of the black or the white, or if this just happened to be a refreshing change of pace for me. None of us have ever asked the men for anything, Agatha states. Not a single thing, not even for the salt to be passed, not even for a penny, or a moment alone, or to take the washing in, or to open a curtain, or to go easy on the small yearlings, or to put your hand on the small of my back as I try, again, for the 12th or 13th time, to push a baby out of my body. Isn't it interesting, she says, that the one and only request the women would make of the men would be to leave. The women break out laughing again. I love this. Another feminist book that I absolutely loved was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This came out in 2019. I read this as a Libby audio read by the author. This is a book that I've been dancing around since it came out. For whatever reason, July 2025 compelled me that it's time. I steadily teared up throughout the reading of this book, starting from when she tells her parents what happened and sharing the anecdote at the same time of her mother jumping to immediately grab her sister drowning in the pool, to show the similarity of how when she immediately jumped to hold her while she was telling them that she was assaulted. As a mom, especially in our times today, I am constantly thinking about the harm we raise our children in, both girls and boys. We need to talk to both, to each other. Another thing that really intrigued me was how she had so many questions about everything, but felt unable to ask them. It took me back to when I was her age and how much I was like that too, and how I still am to this day, and how much I'm seeing that that's quickly not becoming the case anymore with younger children, especially girls. This is a stark reminder that pursuing legal justice requires from the victim years in purgatory. She had to put everything in her life on hold. She had to drag her loved ones along in this emotionally painful limbo state. The power there is in writing, in fighting, even though it's very hard and you don't necessarily think of yourself as a strong person. I loved every single one of her Jaws analogies. I loved her advocacy for others. And I never thought about Brock Turner or his family, but after reading this book, it's impressed upon me that it's part of the equation too. Like, this should feel like a Cinderella story of triumph, like a, early aughts style Olsen twins starring movie with a heartwarming ending with the villain going away to jail and Mary-Kate looking smug into the camera, getting her justice. But Brock Turner's and his family's inherent entitlement that is very clear on the page undoubtedly hasn't shed after all this time. And our current events prove that too many people still de-gaff about women or have any inclination to do the right thing. And it's just a reminder that Chanel Miller's story is truly a unique victory story. I really like this book a lot. I feel like it's extremely important. We should be teaching this at schools, teaching this at home. This needs to be forever stocked in bookstores and libraries, which it is. However, it's just one of those inescapable feelings of we're doing all the right things, but I don't feel much of an impact. I don't feel much change. Her mantra, everything I need to get through this, I already have. Everything I need to know, I already know. Everything I need to be, I already am. I wrote down immediately in my journal to forever remember this and to forever have this for whenever I need it. If you also have been avoiding this book because of its heaviness, as soon as you feel ready to, I implore you, you should read this. The Lonely City, Adventures in the Art of Being Alone by Olivia Ling, which came out in 2016, is another book that I've had sitting on my shelves that I have been ignoring. And for whatever reason, this summer was the time to get her done. I have to say, this is not at all what I thought it would be. I kind of expected along the lines of Flaneurs by Lauren Elkin, which it kind of is, but this just had way more art history than I anticipated. Also way more sexual content than I anticipated, but all of it is tied to themes of loneliness, so I get it. I do think that it works. But I did find Ling's overall tone to be very grating and rooted in white woman privileged. I thought the most interesting bits were about Andy Warhol and the AIDS epidemic. I really appreciated the approach in talking about art history coming from a very memoir-y place. But it was also paired with this very meandering approach to the topics discussed and a heavy emphasis on sexual deviance that I just found annoying. And I did question if it's me, am I just being prudish? But I want to say no, and that it is weird. But what, after all, is weird? And weird to who? Yeah, I really struggled with this one, not gonna lie, especially since it's just not what I thought it would be. But I definitely did find this interesting to mull over. This is one of those booktube darlings, I think, during 2020, 2021. A lot of book content creators were reading The Lonely City, hence why it got on my radar. Let me know if you read this and what you think of it and what you love about it so much. Please. Last but not least, I read Last Quarter, which are published in these 2 recent volumes. This is by Ayazawa. This originally came out in 1998. A new Ayazawa to me in 2025 is such a treat. Even if I could identify like all the similar characters that she has in her oeuvre, in the similarities between like both the drawings and in personality, I don't care. I always find Ayazawa's work to be beautiful, hilarious, poignant, charming. I love the way that she depicts children, how autonomous they are, determined, full of their own lives. The group of 4 children are the star of the story, which is a love story, but I love that that love story takes a backseat to the children and what's going on with them. I want to know more about those kids for once. I finally know who Adam is from Junko's Bar in like the Nana bonus pages. And as cute and as charming as this was, the story of how lonely a girl can feel and the power of friends to save her is just so precious and so needed for me right now. That's everything that I read in the month of July. I have been having such a blast reading this summer. I really feel like I'm reading as if there's no tomorrow. I definitely do think that it's because pretty soon, once the school year starts, I'm gonna be way busier than this summer. This summer, for once, I don't have as much on my plate as I regularly do. As a result, I'm learning a lot more about myself, of what my choices would be if XYZ. I'm finding that I am who I am. And that no matter what, I'll just stay who I am. Like, this is it. I'm not gonna be something completely different other than this, no matter what. Basically, this is always the case every month, but I feel like all the books that I read every month feel so random, and each one of them, for however way, simply just call to me to be read at this particular point in time. And to me, that feels so exciting. It's part of the thrill I get from reading and from my reading life. It's one of those things that make you feel like life's pretty good. There's something to look forward to every day. You don't necessarily know what that'll be, but it's something worth getting up for, you know? I have the month of August of more like fun reading time before the school year starts and the busy season starts. So I feel like this is my version of living my summer to the fullest, and I'm choosing to spend that with a shit ton of books. And thank you for following along with me on my reading journey, as I do every month. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you've had thoughts on any of these books, if you've heard of Denise Loverto, if I should try a John Green novel. Please let me know. Thank you so much. I'll see you very soon. Bye.